Hi, friends. I've had this topic on my mind for a while that I wanted to chat about, and so I thought today was a good day to approach it. It's a topic that I think it took me a long time to learn, and so maybe it would be helpful to someone else. So here it is. Um, it's basically my tip on how to listen to classical music, and this sort of sounds like maybe it's common sense, and that there's no trick to that. But actually, in my experience, it it actually took a while to learn how to really appreciate classical music on its own more in depth than just sort of a background type music. And so, first of all, this video and my talk is not meant to denigrate pop music at all, because pop music has its own thing, and it's enjoyable on its own level, and it's there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because in a way pop music blends lots of other forms of music. It blends really classicals blended in there a lot of times in orchestration. It can be operatic. It blends, of course, it can blend jazz elements of jazz and folk. But different types of music have different ways of listening to it. So pop music is it's got a lyrical thing going on sometimes, and sometimes the lyrics are secondary to the tune or to the music or to the just the beat, the emotional beat, and then something like folk music, of course, that really singles in on the lyrics. So it's usually very minimalized as far as its instrumentation, and jazz is free form, so there's not necessarily a melody. So it's a different experience. So each type of music really has a different experience, and I think that a lot of times for me, what's termed classical music was sort of the hardest to learn how to experience on a on a more meaningful level. I was not brought up in an environment. My family did not listen to classical music. I didn't have a lot of access to it. I was aware of it, just sort of in the general background, but it's not something that I really grew up hearing. So maybe this is part of what my problem was, as far as being able to sort of access it on a deeper level. Um, I did get exposed in college. I took a class in music appreciation, and I did learn from that class. I guess my biggest takeaway from that class was to be able to listen in detail to the various parts of classical music, like a symphony, for example, or a concerto. But it didn't really sink in. And so then I spent most of my time. I liked classical music, but I spent most of my time when I was listening to classical music as it going on in the background. So it was, relaxing, or it was when I was reading, or something like that. It wasn't something that I devoted a lot of attention to when it was playing. And even went to concerts and things like that. And in that level, it's a different experience, because you're there in the moment. I think the first, but still, concerts. It's very. I went a very long time, even with live performances, seeing or hearing classical music cinematically, because that was what I was most used to. As far as relating to it. So I would hear a piece, and if I was really super listening to it, if it wasn't just something going on in the background, for example, if I was at a live performance where I was actually paying more attention, I tended to want to put a story to whatever was to the music. And that's because, of the modern experience, I think, my modern experience of experiencing classical music in film scores, which are basically a form of classical music in a way. So then whenever I would hear even, some piece from the 19th century, well before the time of film, I still tended to, I found my mind still tried to attach something to it, attach a story to it, or attach an emotion to it. So, I would listen to a piece and be trying to figure out what the story was. So, a verbal story or a visual story. And I don't think that's necessarily the most, I don't think that's the best way. That is a way, that is a valid way, of course, to listen to classical music, because there is no wrong way to. There is no right and wrong answer. But I think when I finally realized that a classical music piece like a symphony is actually like a book on tape, except it's not verbal. And it's not telling a verbal story. It's not telling a visual story either. It's telling an auditory story. It's telling a hearing story only. I mean, that auditory story may trigger emotions, and it may trigger a memory, or it may trigger even a visual to a degree, but it actually needs to be listened to for itself. So, for example, if you've listened to an audiobook ever, you may find your mind still going to other things briefly during the story, but you're still listening attentively enough to follow the story. If your mind has wandered to the point where you're no longer listening to the story, to the book, the audio book, then you've missed, you miss pieces, so you don't know, oh, well, what happened? So you might have to actually even backtrack and listen to that part again so that you can understand the storyline, because you've had a break in the narrative. And so I think this is true of classical music too, like symphonies and concertos, etc., etc. Because if you're not paying attention to it auditorily through your listening, through hearing, then you're going to miss some of the experience. So if you start out and you're listening very attentively, and then halfway through or whatever, you start thinking about your shopping list, or your mind wanders into something else, then for 5 or 10 minutes, then you've kind of missed the cohesiveness of the piece, just like you would have missed the cohesiveness of a story, a verbal story. So I think this has been really helpful to me to think of listening to classical music in this way. And by doing that, I have experienced it on a completely different level. So it's no longer, to me, just background music or studying music or reading music. Although those are all valid reasons to play classical music, because it's just like you might want a book on in the background, or you may want TV on in the background. Some people want TV on, or maybe the news on in the background, and they're not really paying attention to the news. So if you ask the person, what did he just say? What did the newscaster just say? The person may say, oh, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention, because it was just on for kind of noise, background kind of noise, and that's okay. That's fine too. I'm just trying to make the case that if you haven't listened to classical music as if you were listening to an audiobook, meaning it may take an hour to hear it, because some of these pieces are pretty long, or even longer, it's worth it in the end to understand where this music is coming from. And forms like jazz are the same thing. It's another genre, I think, that a lot of times gets pushed into the background, coffee house background kind of thing. But if you take the time to listen to a jazz set very attentively, as if you were listening to a book, just say, okay, I'm devoting this hour Just like you would say, I'm going to devote an hour. I'm going to devote this hour to hear 3 chapters of my book that I'm listening to right now. Then you would want to devote that time to listening to the classical piece. So I think that to me it was a way to think of it and a way to experiment with listening to classical music and really appreciating it on a different level. So give it a try if you haven't done that. That's really all I wanted to chat about on that topic, I think, at this point. I hope you maybe found it interesting or helpful in some way. If you give it a try, I think you might be pleased if you've not experienced music on this level before. So that's it. Until next time, take care. Bye.